Daniel Mercer had been seated at table 19, which was not really a table so much as a polite apology covered with a white cloth. It sat near the service corridor of the Cross Future Scholars Foundation gala, close enough to the kitchen doors that every time they swung open, Daniel could smell roasted chicken coffee and the sharp citrus of some dessert being carried. Past people who had paid $10,000 a plate to pretend they were not hungry. He did not complain. He had lived long enough to understand that expensive rooms had their own geography, and men in slightly worn suits were usually placed near the edges of the map. The gala program rested beside his water glass. Its cover showed a smiling girl holding a college acceptance letter with gold letters across the top. Cross Future Scholars Foundation Annual Bridge Gala. Daniel touched the edge of the booklet with his thumb, not opening it yet. Under his cuff, a small silver bracelet charm pressed lightly against his wrist, hidden on a thin cord he wore only on nights when memory felt heavier than usual. It had belonged to his wife Claire. A tiny open book, silver and scratched, because she used to say, "A child with a book still had a door." Across the ballroom, Evelyn Cross stood under the chandelier lights like she belonged to all of them. Billionaire founder, venture CEO, charity icon, the woman whose name was printed on the banners and whispered by donors who wanted to seem generous in her direction. She wore a deep blue evening jacket over a black dress, elegant without trying too hard, composed in the way powerful people become when too many eyes are always waiting for a mistake. Daniel watched her smile at a board member, accept a kiss on the cheek from an old donor, and nod at a photographer without ever seeming fully present. At his table, no one had sat beside him. 2 name cards had been removed before he arrived, leaving only a folded napkin and an empty chair. A gala assistant had checked his ticket 3 times, each time glancing at his suit as if the paper might apologize for him. Daniel did not mind the empty chair. He had come alone because Lily was in the youth program room upstairs with the other scholarship families, helping younger children draw thank you cards while the adults downstairs decided which children sounded expensive on paper. Vanessa Cole, the foundation's development chief, appeared beside him with a smile that had no warmth left in it. "Mr. Mercer, I hope everything is satisfactory." "It is," Daniel said. "Wonderful. We're very full tonight, so table assignments were a little complicated." Her eyes flicked to the empty seats. "You understand?" "I do." She waited, perhaps expecting embarrassment or gratitude. Daniel gave her neither. After a second, she smiled again and moved away toward tables closer to the stage where men in dark suits laughed with the relaxed volume of people whose names appeared on donor walls. Daniel opened the gala program. He passed the photographs of award winners, the sponsor pages, the founder's letter, and stopped at the section marked Bridge Scholars Program. There were 3 paragraphs where there used to be 4. The language had changed. Not closed. Not cut. Strategic transition. Consolidated support model. New visibility framework. Daniel read the words twice, and something cold settled beneath his ribs. At the head table, Evelyn Cross was listening to Charles Whitmore, the foundation board chair, speak quietly into her ear. Charles was 63, silver-haired, perfectly tailored, and gifted at making hard decisions sound like weather. He kept one hand over his wine glass and the other on a folder beside his plate. Evelyn's face remained polite, but Daniel saw the slight tightening around her mouth. Charles said something. Evelyn answered. He smiled as if she had agreed even before she had. Then Evelyn looked away. Her gaze moved across the ballroom past the sponsor tables and the photographers past Vanessa Cole, arranging people by importance past the stage where a scholarship video waited to play. For a moment her eyes stopped on Daniel. Not because he waved. Not because he tried to be seen. Perhaps because he was the only person in the room not performing delight. He simply sat with the program open, reading a page everyone else had applauded without noticing. Evelyn said something to Charles and stood. The movement was small, but at the head table, small movements became announcements. Charles turned. Vanessa paused near the aisle. A few donors followed Evelyn with their eyes as she left the VIP table and walked across the room carrying no entourage, no glass, no speech cards. Daniel watched her approach with the cautious curiosity of a man who had spent years avoiding attention and now found it crossing directly toward him. She stopped beside the empty chair at table 19. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. The question was simple. Almost too simple for the room it landed in. Around them, conversations softened but did not stop. People were too polished to stare openly, so they stared in reflections in glassware in the angle of their shoulders. Vanessa Cole's expression froze near the dessert station. Charles Whitmore leaned back at the head table, eyes narrowing. Daniel looked at the empty chair. Then at Evelyn. "It's your gala." "That wasn't my question." There was no arrogance in her voice. Only exhaustion and maybe a little honesty escaping before the evening could catch it. Daniel moved the program booklet from beside the empty chair and placed it near his water glass. "Yes," he said. "You can sit." Evelyn sat down with a quiet breath as if the chair had been waiting for something more human than status. Up close, Daniel noticed what the stage lights hid from the rest of the room. She looked tired. Not weak. Not fragile. But tired in the way people become when their name is on every dream and every failure. She glanced toward the head table where Charles was now speaking with another board member. "I needed a minute away from people congratulating me for decisions I haven't agreed to yet," she said. Daniel looked down at the Bridge Scholars page. "That sounds expensive." Her eyes shifted to him, surprised. Then she smiled, not the gala smile but something smaller. "It usually is." A server appeared instantly nervous that the founder was sitting at the wrong table. Evelyn asked for coffee. Daniel lifted his paper cup slightly. "They may bring you something better than this." "I hope not," she said. "This looks honest." He almost laughed. It came out more like breath. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The gala carried on around them with careful music and soft applause from a nearby sponsor introduction. Evelyn looked at Daniel's program open to the Bridge Scholars section. "You're reading that closely. It matters." "To you?" Daniel did not answer right away. He touched the silver charm under his cuff, hidden from view. Programs like this tend to matter most to people who nearly needed them too late. Evelyn's face changed. The founder in her listened. "Your child?" "My daughter, Lily. She's 11 now." "Is she here tonight?" "Upstairs with the youth group. She likes helping with the little kids because she says they take crayons seriously." Evelyn smiled. "That sounds like wisdom. She gets that from her mother." The sentence arrived calmly, but Evelyn heard the past tense. She did not rush to fill it, which Daniel appreciated more than condolences. After a moment, she said, "I'm sorry." "Thank you." "When did you lose her?" 2020. The year still held too much inside it. Hospitals, distance, school forms. A 5-year-old girl asking whether mommy could still hear stories if they read them quietly. Daniel had moved through that year like a man carrying glass in his arms while the ground kept changing. He had been an industrial designer then, with licensing contracts that had finally begun to pay after years of ordinary work and patient invention. Not rich in the way this room understood rich, but stable enough to be useful. Then grief made every stable thing feel borrowed. "Lily was 5, he said. "We had to change schools after Claire died. Not because we wanted to, because the old one became a place where every hallway had a memory in it. Lily stopped talking during drop-off. Stopped eating lunch. Her teacher said she was present but not there." Evelyn listened without moving. A counselor mentioned an emergency continuity grant through Cross Future Scholars. It helped with placement support, tutoring, transport, the kind of small things that look administrative until they're the only reason a child keeps moving. Daniel looked toward the youth program stairs. Lily started drawing again after 6 weeks. First picture she made was terrible. Purple sun, green dog. I kept it anyway. Evelyn's eyes softened. The Bridge Scholars team handled that. Ruth Alvarez did. Evelyn nodded immediately. Ruth remembers every child. She remembered Lily's favorite pencil brand. That sounds like Ruth. Daniel looked at the program booklet again. "So, yes, it matters." Evelyn sat back, and for the first time since she arrived at the table, she did not seem like a billionaire visiting the edge of her own gala. She seemed like a woman hearing that something she built had reached a room she had never entered. "Sometimes the board thinks Bridge Scholars is too hard to explain to donors," she said quietly. "It doesn't make for clean photographs. No single dramatic award moment. Just messy continuity. Tuition gap here, bus route there. Emergency placement counseling, tutoring, crisis casework. Doors," Daniel said. She looked at him. "My wife used to say a child with a book still had a door." Bridge Scholars builds doors where the walls are already closing. Evelyn did not answer. The phrase seemed to land somewhere private. At that moment, Vanessa Cole appeared beside the table again, smile, brighter and more brittle than before. "Evelyn, Charles is looking for you. The donor recognition segment begins in 8 minutes." "I know." "Of course." Vanessa glanced at Daniel. "Mr. Mercer, I hope you're enjoying the evening." "I am." Vanessa's eyes moved to the open program. It's wonderful when guests take an interest in the Foundation's broader work. Daniel met her gaze. "Is Bridge Scholars' broader work now?" The question was polite. That made it worse. Vanessa blinked. "I'm sorry. In the 2023 report, it was called a Core Emergency Continuity Program. Tonight's booklet calls it Transitional Support. That usually means someone is preparing donors for a cut." Vanessa's smile vanished by 1 careful inch. Evelyn turned toward Daniel fully. He continued, still calm. The retention number is missing too. You listed placement volume but not 90-day academic continuity. That was the program's strongest outcome. If you remove the best metric, people assume the program is weaker than it is. The conversations nearest table 19 faded. Vanessa looked at Evelyn. I wasn't aware Mr. Mercer had reviewed our internal reports. Daniel closed the booklet gently. They were public. Charles Whitmore approached from behind Vanessa, carrying the same folder Daniel had noticed at the head table. Evelyn, he said, with the pleasant firmness of a man arriving to retrieve an asset. The room is waiting. So I hear, Evelyn said. Charles gave Daniel a courteous nod that did not reach his eyes. Mr. Mercer, is it? Yes. Charles Whitmore, board chair. Always pleased to see engaged supporters. Daniel shook his hand. Charles had the grip of someone measuring both strength and worth. Daniel Mercer, are you affiliated with one of our sponsor groups? No. Scholarship family. Once in a way. Charles placed a hand on the back of Evelyn's chair. Then you understand how difficult these allocation decisions can be. A foundation must balance heart with sustainability. Daniel looked at the folder under Charles's arm. Sustainability usually depends on what you decide is allowed to survive. For the first time, Charles studied him rather than dismissed him. Evelyn said quietly. Daniel was asking why the continuity metric was removed. Vanessa rushed in. The booklet was simplified for general donor readability. Daniel nodded. That would make sense if the sponsor pages had been simplified too. A small silence opened around the table. Not loud, not theatrical, just enough for the people nearby to feel the temperature change. Charles smiled with less patience. You seem unusually familiar with our reporting language. I read what matters to my daughter. Ruth Alvarez, standing several tables away, with a stack of youth program cards, turned at the sound of Daniel's voice. She had been watching Evelyn at table 19 with growing curiosity, but now she looked directly at Daniel, then at the booklet in his hand, then at the silver charm cord barely visible beneath his cuff. Her brow furrowed as if she had heard an old sentence spoken in a new room. Charles said, the board has a responsibility to ensure donor funds are used where they create measurable impact. Then keep the measure that shows impact, Daniel said. Vanessa's face flushed. Mr. Mercer, with respect, the foundation has many sophisticated stakeholders involved in this analysis. Daniel's expression did not change. Children are sophisticated stakeholders. They just don't get invited to the analysis. Evelyn looked down quickly, hiding something that might have been a smile or pain. Charles's voice lowered. Evelyn, we should not litigate strategy during the gala. No, she said, standing slowly. We should not, but we will discuss it tomorrow. We already have a board breakfast scheduled. Yes, Evelyn said, and bridge scholars will be on the agenda before the vote. Charles's eyes sharpened. There is no vote tomorrow. There is a recommendation. Then, I recommend we call it what it is. The room around them did not know exactly what had happened, only that the billionaire host had sat at the smallest table and returned to the head of the room changed. Vanessa moved away first, unsettled. Charles followed Evelyn back toward the stage, his folder held tighter than before. Daniel remained seated. He wished suddenly and deeply that he had not said so much. Quiet giving was simple when it stayed quiet. You wired the funds, read the updates, kept your name out of rooms like this, and let the work belong to the people doing it. Words complicated things. Attention complicated everything. Ruth Alvarez approached his table after Charles and Evelyn were gone. Daniel Mercer, she said softly. He looked up. I remember a Lily Mercer. His face warmed with old grief and pride. She remembers you. Ruth sat down without asking because Ruth was the kind of woman who had earned the right to sit anywhere children's futures were being discussed. Purple sun, she said. Daniel froze. She gave me a drawing after her first tutoring week. Purple sun, green dog, little house with a blue door. Daniel's throat tightened. You kept that in the file. I keep copies of many things. Ruth studied him for a moment. You used a phrase tonight. Doors where the walls are closing. My wife's phrase. Ruth's eyes narrowed with memory. I have seen something like that phrase before. Daniel became very still. Have you? In guidance notes attached to anonymous emergency gifts. Not exact, but close. Ruth's voice stayed gentle, but her mind was clearly moving. The donor never wanted recognition. Always asked that bridge scholars prioritize continuity over ceremony. Always said children in crisis needed doors, not spotlights. Daniel looked toward the youth program stairs. Sounds like a sensible person. Ruth did not smile. Sounds like someone who knew us from the inside without ever coming through the front door. Before Daniel could answer, the ballroom lights dimmed for the scholarship video. On the stage, Evelyn stood beneath the foundation logo, holding her speech cards. She looked out at donors, board members, staff cameras, sponsors, and finally, for a brief second, toward table 19. Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Lily. "Dad, are you still downstairs? Miss Ruth said I might get to show the card later. Also, the cookies are tiny." Daniel smiled despite himself and typed back, "I'm here. Be kind to the cookies. They're doing their best." On stage, Evelyn began her speech. She spoke about promise, access, and the children whose futures depended on adults keeping commitments after the applause ended. It was a polished speech, but Daniel could hear the new weight under it. She had changed one line. He knew because the printed program still showed the old one. "Tonight is not only about celebrating the children who make it to the stage," Evelyn said. "It is also about protecting the children still trying to stay in the room." Ruth glanced at Daniel. He looked down at the silver charm on his wrist. After the speech, applause filled the ballroom and the gala resumed its golden rhythm. But the quiet at table 19 did not go away. Ruth excused herself and walked toward the development office corridor with unusual purpose. Vanessa noticed and followed at a distance. Charles Whitmore stood near the stage, speaking to two donors while watching Evelyn with controlled concern. Daniel knew that look. He had spent 6 years avoiding it. A few minutes later, Evelyn returned to table 19, not sitting this time, just standing beside him as the room moved around them. "Mr. Mercer," she said, quieter than before. "Tomorrow morning, Charles intends to recommend cutting bridge scholars by half and moving the funds into higher visibility awards." Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. "I thought you should know," she said. He opened them. "Why? Tell me." "Because when I said it out loud tonight, you looked less surprised than I did." That was too close to the truth. Daniel gathered the program booklet and stood. "Miss Cross, I'm just a father who remembers who helped his daughter." She looked at him carefully. "I don't think you're just anything." Across the room, Ruth Alvarez entered the side corridor leading toward archived donor records. Vanessa Cole followed faster now, her expression no longer social but protective. Daniel saw them both and felt the past beginning to move without his permission. From upstairs, Lily appeared at the balcony railing holding a handmade thank you card with a crooked blue door drawn on the front. Daniel looked at his daughter, then at Evelyn, then toward the corridor where the old files were kept. For 6 years, his name had stayed out of the story. By morning, he suspected that would no longer be possible. Ruth Alvarez did not run through the donor corridor because Ruth had worked in foundations long enough to know that running made people ask the wrong questions. She walked with purpose instead, past the framed photographs of smiling scholarship graduates, past the wall of polished donor names, and into the small archive office where the real memory of Cross future scholars lived. The gala outside glowed with music and applause, but in this room there were metal cabinets. Old thank you cards, scanned family letters, emergency request forms, and the quiet paperwork of children who had almost fallen through the cracks. Vanessa Cole followed her in and closed the door. "Ruth, what are you doing?" Ruth unlocked the archive drawer labeled Bridge Scholars Restricted Donor Notes, checking a memory. "This is not the time." "It is exactly the time." Vanessa's face tightened. "If this is about Mr. Mercer, he is a guest. Evelyn chose to make a personal moment out of it, but we do not need to turn an awkward seating issue into a donor investigation." Ruth pulled a folder from the drawer. It was not thick because the donor had insisted on minimal correspondence. But the pages inside carried 6 years of survival. Emergency gap transfer, mid-year continuity support, unrestricted bridge allocation. Note, prioritize children facing school disruption after family loss. Note, no recognition. Note, fund doors, not spotlights. Ruth looked down at the last line for a long moment. Vanessa saw it too. "Close that," Vanessa said. Ruth looked up slowly. "You knew the phrase. I know many donor phrases. You knew this donor was connected to bridge scholars in a personal way." Vanessa crossed her arms. "I knew we had an anonymous donor-advised channel that preferred not to be contacted. That is not unusual." "No," Ruth said. "But allowing the board to consider cutting the program without telling Evelyn that one anonymous donor has carried its deficit for 6 years is unusual." Vanessa's voice dropped. The donor money was unreliable. It arrived every year. It arrived anonymously. That was the condition, not the problem. The problem, Vanessa snapped, is that no serious foundation can build strategy around a ghost. Charles is right about that. Visible donors create confidence. Named commitments create leverage. A man at table 19 with a worn suit and sentimental phrases does not stabilize a foundation brand. Ruth stared at her, and the years in her face seemed to deepen. Children do not attend brands. They attend schools. Vanessa looked away first. Outside the archive, the gala continued until it did what galas always do. It turned generosity into dessert applause and controlled exits. Donors drifted toward the coat check. Cameras packed away. Evelyn Cross remained near the stage, answering final congratulations with a mind that had clearly left the room. Daniel Mercer found Lily at the foot of the staircase holding her blue door thank you card carefully by the edges so the glue would not smear. "Did they like the cards?" Daniel asked. Lily nodded. "Miss Ruth said mine had good architecture." "That sounds like Miss Ruth." She also looked worried. Daniel glanced toward the donor corridor. Grown-ups at galas often look worried after dessert. Lily tilted her head. She was 11, too young to understand foundation politics and old enough to recognize when her father was avoiding something. Are they really going to cut bridge scholars? Daniel looked at her card. On the front, she had drawn a blue door standing in the middle of a gray wall. Behind the door was a yellow sun, smaller and more careful than the purple one she had drawn 6 years ago. "They might try," he said. "But they helped us." "Yes. And you always say when someone holds a door open for you, you don't let it slam on the kid behind you." Daniel smiled faintly. "I do say that. Then don't leave before they vote." The sentence landed harder than any accusation could have. Daniel had spent 6 years giving quietly because quiet felt clean. There were no speeches in quiet, no handshakes, no rich people turning pain into a photograph. But Lily was not asking him to be applauded. She was asking him not to let silence become absence. He knelt in front of her. Some truths get complicated when they become public. She looked at him with Claire's eyes. Maybe they're already complicated for the kids who need the money. Daniel had no answer. The next morning, the board breakfast was held in a smaller room on the foundation's 10th floor, where sunlight came through tall windows and made everything look more honest than it was. There were 12 chairs around a long walnut table, a buffet no one seemed to touch, and a screen showing the agenda Strategic Refocus Scholarship Visibility Bridge Scholars Cost Review. Charles Whitmore sat at the head of the table with his folder open. Vanessa Cole sat near him, pale but composed. Evelyn sat across from Charles with no speech cards today, only a legal pad and a pen she had not used. Daniel had not been invited. He arrived anyway, not in anger, but because Lily had asked him not to leave. Ruth met him outside the room. She held the restricted donor folder against her chest. "You do not have to do this," she said. "I know. If you walk in, the anonymity is gone." Daniel touched the silver charm at his wrist. Maybe anonymity was useful when it protected the work. Maybe it stops being useful when people use not knowing as an excuse to kill it. Ruth's expression softened. Claire would have liked that sentence. Daniel looked at her sharply. Ruth nodded toward the folder. Her name appears in one early note. Not publicly. Just once. For Claire, who believed a book was a door. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. He had forgotten writing it. Or maybe he had buried it because grief made even generous acts feel like letters sent to someone who would never open them. Inside, Charles had already begun. Bridge Scholars has noble history, but we are facing donor fatigue and allocation inefficiency. The program is expensive per student, administratively heavy, and difficult to present in a clear gala narrative. I recommend a 50% reduction this cycle, followed by a migration of funds into named excellence awards with higher donor visibility. Evelyn's voice was calm. "Before we discuss reduction, I want the full deficit history." Charles smiled politely. We reviewed the summary. "I want the full history." Vanessa shifted. "Evelyn, the full restricted donor file includes confidential channel information. Then redact what must be redacted and show the board what it should have seen before making recommendations." Ruth opened the door and stepped in with Daniel behind her. Every face turned. Charles looked from Ruth to Daniel. "This is a closed board session." Ruth placed the folder on the table. "It is also a meeting about a program whose funding history has been selectively summarized." Vanessa stood halfway. "Ruth." Evelyn looked at Daniel and something in her face changed. Not shock yet, but recognition that the quiet man from table 19 had not come as a spectator. Daniel remained near the door. "I did not come to embarrass anyone." Charles's voice hardened. "Mr. Mercer, whatever emotional attachment you have to the program, this board has fiduciary obligations." "I agree." That stopped Charles for half a second. Daniel continued. "You have an obligation to know what you are cutting." Ruth opened the folder. "Bridge Scholars has run an annual deficit for 6 years. That is true. What the summary did not show is that the deficit was covered each year by one anonymous donor-advised channel with additional emergency transfers during enrollment disruptions." Charles frowned. "We are aware of anonymous support. No, Evelyn said, reading the first page. Ruth slid to her. We were aware of amounts, not conditions, not continuity. Ruth pointed to the notes. The donor requested no recognition, no gala mention, no naming rights. The only repeated guidance was that funds remain focused on emergency academic continuity, especially children facing school disruption after family loss. Vanessa looked down. Daniel felt the room beginning to turn toward him even before anyone said his name. He had known this would happen, and still his body resisted it. Attention felt like a bright light held too close to a scar. Evelyn read another page slower now. Please fund doors, not spotlights. Her voice caught slightly. She looked at Daniel. You said that last night. Daniel did not move. Charles looked between them. Ruth, are you implying Mr. Mercer knows this donor? Ruth closed the folder gently. I am saying Mr. Mercer is the donor. The room went silent. There are silences that accuse, and silences that confess. This one did both. The board members looked at Daniel's modest suit, his worn cuffs, the quiet posture they had mistaken for smallness, and then at the ledger showing 6 years of transfers large enough to keep an entire program alive. Vanessa sat back down as if her legs had forgotten the rest of the room. Charles did not speak at all. Evelyn stood slowly. Daniel. He looked at her, not proud, not ashamed, just tired of hiding from a truth that had outgrown its hiding place. Yes. For 6 years. Yes. You kept bridge scholars alive. No, he said. Ruth kept it alive. The tutors kept it alive. The caseworkers kept it alive. I paid some bills. Evelyn's eyes shone, but she held herself steady. Why didn't you tell me? Because the work did not need my name on it. Charles found his voice. With respect, Mr. Mercer, these are significant gifts. We would need to verify. Ruth placed the transfer ledger in front of him. Already verified through the donor-advised channel. Legal identity confirmation was provided this morning at Mr. Mercer's request. Vanessa looked up sharply. This morning. Daniel said, my daughter asked me not to leave before the vote. The sentence disarmed the room more completely than any financial number could have. Evelyn stepped away from her chair but did not approach him yet. Last night I asked if I could sit with you because you looked like the only person in the room who wasn't asking anything from me. Daniel gave a small, sad smile. I was asking something, just not out loud. What? That you remember why you built it. Evelyn looked down at the folder, then at Charles. When she spoke again, the softness was gone, replaced by the founder the room had come to respect and sometimes fear. We are not cutting bridge scholars. Charles inhaled. Evelyn. No, we are not reducing it by half. We are not burying it under visibility language. And we are not moving money away from children in crisis because their success is harder to photograph. A board member near the window cleared his throat. We still need sustainability. Yes, Evelyn said. So we will build it honestly. We create a restricted reserve for bridge scholars. We publish the continuity outcomes Charles's summary removed. We invite donors into the real work instead of pretending only stage-friendly stories count. And we review why a 6-year anonymous funding pattern was presented to this board as unreliable background support. All eyes shifted to Vanessa. Vanessa swallowed. I did not hide the donations. They were in the finance packets. They were stripped of narrative, Ruth said, and narrative was the weapon used to cut the program. Charles's face reddened. This is becoming accusatory. Daniel spoke before Evelyn could. It does not need to be. People make clean charts because messy needs make them uncomfortable. I understand that. But children do not become less real because their rescue is hard to summarize. The room settled again, this time around the truth instead of away from it. Evelyn looked at Charles. Call the vote. He stared at her. On what motion? To reject the reduction, preserve bridge scholars at full funding for the next cycle, and establish an emergency continuity reserve with independent reporting. One by one the votes came. Some quickly, some reluctantly. But they came. The motion passed. Charles closed his folder with controlled force. He had not been destroyed, but he had been corrected in the only language his position respected: governance. Vanessa was reassigned from restricted donor reporting pending review. Ruth was appointed interim program reporting lead. Evelyn requested a full audit of how program impact had been presented to the board. The institutional correction was not glamorous, but it was real. Daniel stayed near the door throughout all of it. When the meeting ended, board members approached him awkwardly. One thanked him for his generosity. Another offered a business card. A third began to say something about partnership visibility but stopped when Daniel's expression made clear that he had no interest in becoming a new plaque on an old wall. Evelyn waited until they were gone. The room was quieter now. Ruth had taken the folder back. Charles had left. Vanessa stood outside the glass wall, speaking with legal counsel, her face drawn and defensive. Daniel looked at the chairs, the untouched breakfast, the screen still showing strategic refocus, and thought how many futures could be endangered by people who renamed retreat as strategy. Evelyn approached him carefully. "I don't know how to thank you." "You do." She waited. "Don't thank me instead of fixing it." Evelyn nodded. "I won't." He believed her, not because she was a billionaire, not because she had power, but because she had asked to sit with him before she knew what he had given. That mattered. Kindness before usefulness was rare enough to count. "I should have known," she said. "No," Daniel said. "You should have been told the truth. Those are different failures." She took that in. "Will you let us recognize you?" "No. Privately. You already have." "Daniel." He looked at her then. Evelyn's voice lowered. "You saved something I built before I understood how close I was to losing it." Daniel touched the bracelet charm. "My wife used to say the measure of a gift is whether it keeps giving after the giver walks away." "Claire." He nodded. "She would be proud." Daniel looked toward the window because grief still had its own weather. "She would tell me I made it unnecessarily complicated." Evelyn laughed softly through tears she did not let fall. That afternoon the foundation held a smaller gathering in the youth program room instead of the ballroom. No photographers were invited except the staff member who took pictures for families who wanted them. Children sat at round tables with crayons, cookies, and scholarship folders. Ruth announced that Bridge Scholars would continue and expand its emergency continuity work. She did not name Daniel. She did not need to. Lily stood near her father, watching the room react not with the dramatic silence of the board but with something better: relief. Evelyn spoke briefly. "Some programs are easy to celebrate because they end on a stage. Others matter because they keep a child from disappearing before anyone knows how much promise was there. Bridge Scholars is not being reduced. It is being protected." Parents cried quietly. Tutors hugged students. A boy near the back asked if this meant his bus support was safe, and Ruth said yes before anyone could turn the answer into policy language. Lily slipped her hand into Daniel's. "You did it. We did not do anything alone. But you stayed." He looked down at her. "You asked me to." She held out the blue door card. "Can I give this to Miss Cross?" Daniel nodded. Lily walked to Evelyn with the careful seriousness of a child carrying something breakable. Evelyn knelt to receive it. On the card, the blue door stood open now, and inside the doorway, Lily had drawn tiny books stacked like stairs. Evelyn read the message and pressed one hand to her heart. Daniel did not ask what it said. Some gifts were better left between the giver and the person who needed them. Later, as the sun lowered over the city, Daniel and Lily stepped out of the foundation building together. The gala banners were gone. Workers were carrying flower arrangements to a van. The donor wall inside still glittered with names, but Daniel did not look back at it. He did not need to be added. The program would live. That was enough. Evelyn joined them near the curb, holding Lily's card. "Mr. Mercer." Daniel, she said. "The reserve is being drafted tonight. Ruth will oversee reporting. Charles agreed to stay off Bridge Scholars allocations for the year." "That sounds like a start." "It is." Lily looked between them. "Are you still a secret donor?" Daniel smiled. "Less secret than yesterday." Evelyn looked at Lily. "Your father helped a lot of children." Lily nodded with the calm confidence of someone who had known the important part already. "He does that." Daniel laughed quietly. It was the first easy sound he had made in 2 days. At the curb, Lily reached for his wrist and touched the silver book charm. "Mom's door," she said. Daniel covered her hand with his. "Yes." For years he had thought quiet generosity meant disappearing completely, letting the gift travel farther than the name. Maybe that was still partly true. But as Lily leaned against him and the foundation doors opened behind them for another family walking inside, Daniel understood something Claire might have understood sooner. Sometimes the giver did not need a spotlight, but sometimes he needed to stand close enough to keep the door from closing. Evelyn watched father and daughter walk away down the sidewalk, not in a limousine, not toward applause, just toward an ordinary evening made lighter by a promise kept. She looked down at Lily's card one more time. Inside, written in careful 11-year-old handwriting, were 6 words. "Thank you for keeping the door open." And for the first time in years, Evelyn Cross understood that her foundation had not been saved by the people whose names shone brightest under the gala lights. It had been carried by a quiet, single dad at the smallest table, a man who never asked to be remembered, only that children like his daughter would not be forgotten.